Since language as a human resource is able to help people master other human resources, the investment of language is a kind of economic investment. It will bring the individual and the society economic benefits in return. In China, for example, the annual income of English training market amounts up to more than 10 billion RMB, with even great market potential underneath.
People wonder, because I know both American Sign Language and Dutch Sign Language, if they really differ from each other. And yes, I could count on my hands how many signs are the same. Pretty much 99% difference. What is similar between sign languages in general is the grammar. So how you use space, how you will set things up within a sentence. You also have non-manuals. You use your face and your body shift in a certain way to also express grammar. And those can be similar, but through knowing sign language linguistics of many different sign languages, we've also seen that they also can vary from sign language to sign language. Within a sign language, you definitely have different dialects, and that's because sign language is one of the least standardized forms of language. It usually has not been used in schools, so as we know, language will evolve within a community. So even communities that live only 20 kilometers away from each other will have quite a strong dialect. So you definitely have people sign language interpreters that may say they know Dutch Sign Language, but they actually know also a dialect. And as an interpreter, I think what's important is to be aware of all the dialects, and therefore you can be a good interpreter for all the different possible clients that you have. If you know a sign language and there are different dialects in a sign language, you can pretty much always understand each other quite well. Because it's such a small, tight-knit community, you don't really come across a whole sentence where you might not understand. There might be one sign that they don't that they use that you don't know, and so you'll just check in with that one sign. There's never a whole concept that you'd be totally lost. To interpret from a spoken language into a sign language, you also look at the meaning of the incoming message. So you make sure you have a lag time. You make sure that you fully understand the whole concept that they are trying to convey, and then you will interpret that into sign language. So stay away from potential level of following sentence by sentence, but giving yourself a really good distance of fully understanding what they want to say. And in our Code of Ethics for Sign Language Interpreters, it says to interpret the message and the intent of the message. When we first hear the message and it's going from spoken language to a sign language, if someone has started talking, we will lift up our hands to let them know that we are actually starting to interpret. However, we will maybe and ah, give some indication that we are listening, but we're processing. On the other way around, if someone is signing and we are voicing for them, then we make sure that we do use those filler words because the minute a deaf person picks up their hands, all the hearing people are waiting to hear that very first word.
Maybe you could show us how and ah looks in sign language.
Sure, and how do you want me to do this in your format? Just I could just begin.
Just say
yeah.
And ah.
So let's say someone starts talking and I'm starting to listen to the incoming. I will lift up my hand and say, well, and then that's kind of helping with in sign language.
It's wonderful.
So sign language definitely lends itself quite well to jokes and or puns. To translate a joke from one language to another doesn't matter if it's two spoken languages or into a sign language. You can never interpret a joke as well as it is in its first language, but sign language definitely has its own humor, and it's of course usually making fun of hearing people because that's a cultural thing. And you can be very punny indeed. You have a certain hand form that might be the same, so if you use two hand forms in a row, that could have a double meaning. You also have that type of play on words. So everything that poetry, you also have sign language poetry. Everything that a language has within arts and culture, you also have in a sign language. The field of sign language interpretation in Europe, I feel, is very unrecognized. I think there's lots more work to do. That's one thing I can say, living in San Francisco, California for 9 years prior to moving to Europe. People really understood what the profession of a sign language interpreter was, that you were not someone's sister or aunt, or the helper or the missionary. And that's still seen today as people ask me, can you really make a living as a sign language interpreter? They would be quite surprised that we say yes. And people are still surprised that they think sign language is even a language, even though we have more than 30 years of linguistic research on the language itself. So in general, Europe definitely can use some education on sign language itself and the profession of sign language interpreter. What I do know in general as a deaf population is usually 1% of a population is deaf, and sign language users can maybe be less than that, because not everyone who is deaf uses sign language, but that population is also growing. As far as sign language interpreters, that varies from country to country. I know in the Netherlands we have roughly 400 registered sign language interpreters, and a good percentage of those are active. If you look at other countries and other books, it could be many more or much less. I know that in the United States, the use of interpreters is at a much larger scale of sign language interpreters. It's been much more incorporated in their daily lives, and also because of the Americans with Disability Act, people have a right to a sign language interpreter much more than here in Europe. But hopefully with the UN Convention on the rights for people with disabilities, that'll be changing here in Europe as well. I think sign language interpretation as a field can be recognized through their spoken language interpreter counterparts. I think even within, for example, AIC, the Association of Interpreters for Conferences, here in Europe, actually I think it's international, has just recognized sign language this January 2012. And that's because there's still some skepticism, if you will, about what is sign language. And I think if people are ignorance is the problem. If people are just educated and know through informational trainings, through workshops, and working closer together, I think that would solve a lot of our problems.
Do you feel there's anything the European institutions could do about this?
I feel that the European institutions themselves can be a role model for having sign language interpretation available. Currently, there has to be a request for sign language interpretation, whereas in the European Parliament, we have a deaf member of Parliament, and he is currently not been provided his own sign language interpreters. That has not been recognized within an EU institution, and if they don't recognize it, they are a role model to the rest of the member states and the EU citizens. So I think it does have to start within the European institutes. And the European Commission in the last 5 years or more has recognized sign language interpreters, and I think that's a really good start. What I hope for sign language in the future is that people do understand that it is a language in its own right. It has some grammar and syntax, and you can really convey everything and anything in sign language. My own personal soapbox is I find sign language is very accessible, and that if actually everyone learned sign language as a second language, it could really affect how we use language every day between hearing people and between the hearing and the deaf communities.